the biggest difference to me for silver right now versus any of those past time frames is silver and the demand for silver increasing so much.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics as we dig back into our coverage of the silver world. Fortunately, joining me, one of our regular guests on the show, Steve Cope of Silver Viper Minerals, who is out exploring their El Ruby project and has a great body of knowledge about the silver market, which we will dig into today. So, Steve, it's great to see you again, and good to see you're enjoying your summer and doing well up there. And how's everything going with you today?
Yeah, I mean, the summer's been a good time to relax and kind of just rejuvenate here while we're in this market that we're in, and hopefully it turns around moving into the fall and we can get all back to work and doing, what we want to be doing.
Well, certainly, and we're recording on Wednesday, August 17th. Price of silver down a bit today, down this week, although after a rally for a couple weeks prior to that. Well, Steve, I was wondering, just to put this into context, as we pull up the silver chart, obviously people who follow silver on a day-to-day basis, especially after seeing silver get close to $30 a few times over the past few months and even reaching the 26 level back in March, even at let's call it 1981 right now, still a bit higher than we've seen in that bear market from about 2015 to 2020, when we saw the silver price even as low as $12. Obviously, inflation costs are a bit higher, but as someone who's been tracking this for a while, was wondering if you could just compare where we stand now to what the environment was like over those past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, the bear market was pretty dark time there, especially towards the latter part of it, and like in that part there in early in 2020 when it dipped heavily too. But the middle of that 2017, 2015 was really nasty. If I remember our sector. It's not that. I mean, we're in a period of time here, whether you want to call it consolidating or moving. I mean, like you said, with inflation, this price doesn't work for the producers as much as some of them will say at $20 they're not making, or most aren't making any money. So it's, and especially with inflation and the costs creeping up here, especially for the miners over the last year or so. But it definitely is a price that needs to come up. But I think like you said, we've seen some consolidating and wanting to move up this summer, which is a good sign in a traditional period where our markets go pretty flat or down through most of the summer. This last week has been a little hiccup, but I mean, I think when you're looking at it, or at least from my perspective, when I look at it, I try and look at it more on a macro scale than trying to panic on a day-to-day basis, watching it go up or down, because I think that'll lead to you like ripping out your hair and going crazy. The biggest difference to me for silver right now versus any of those past time frames is silver and the demand for silver increasing so much. With the new uses, history, go way back. You were talking about the primary silver usage besides stacking and collecting a currency was in like photography, and then that kind of disappeared. We stopped using it in film, and now all of a sudden with this push for electric cars, for solar panels, for all these other things, that to me silver in a way it's transitioning into more or part industrial metal. And I think that part where people used to always say, okay, yeah, it had some industrial uses, but were never really a driver in the price. You're going to see that drive the price moving forward, as these governments around the world are say we're going for this green movement, we need electric cars, we need the infrastructure, and silver is integral in all of that, as well as copper, nickel, cobalt, and other base metals. But silver is the cheap conductor. If they could use gold, they would use gold, but it's too expensive, so they use silver in all those parts. And we don't have enough silver, and we certainly don't, based on from my perspective and what we do, the easy silver deposits have been found there, and they tend to happen close to surface. A lot of those have been found, unless you're going to get into countries where politically you never were allowed into. But Mexico is the number one producer of silver in the world. It's been pretty, the easy deposits have been found. You got to get to more remote or start finding those deposits that are undercover. But the way silver forms, you don't really, it's hard to find the deposits undercover. Most of the really good ones happened at surface. So I don't know what we're going to do as far as, it's going to take prices ramping up, and you're going to start bringing on projects that are, right now would look terrible, but at $100 silver or whatever the number ends up being, they're going to look really good. And if you're going to, with the demand of silver and the way it's increasing, you're going to need those deposits to come online. And it takes, like you say, a long time to bring deposits online.
Yeah, and you actually touched on my next question I was going to run by you, because here a report from Sprott mentioning, in addition to the tighter silver supply, silver grades have been declining for years. Going forward, mining companies will have to invest more in exploration and development to increase or even maintain supply, which, as you pointed out, getting a bit harder in the current environment. And also, you mentioned the government legislation pushing towards green demand. And here, the somewhat ironically named Inflation Reduction Act includes thousands of dollars in tax credits and rebates for electric vehicles, solar panels. And it's nice we see the picture of the guy installing some big solar panels right there, which is all going to be another factor. It doesn't seem like governments are slowing down in legislating green energy demand, which would certainly just add to that pressure, you would think.
Yeah, and I mean the other side of it with solar panels is that it's hard to recycle the silver out of a lot of these products. And so I mean you talk to a lot of people, they'll say the lifespan of a solar panel can be 10, 15 years, and then it's not like you just kind of fix it. A lot of the times that ends up, yes, you can send it off to recycle, but you don't recover the silver. Or you certainly recover maybe a small fraction of the silver from it. So you are constantly going to be needing new silver just to replace the existing infrastructure on, from solar or from, and then like you said, the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support some sort of a world where we ramp up all this electric car, charging stations and the grid and providing power. I mean, I look at like a state like California right now, and you look at what's happening with the Colorado River and the Hoover Dam, one of these major sources of power, and you're less than a year away from, that being dried up and toast. So I don't. Again, you've got to start bringing in, and those, like a state like California has been shutting down their nuclear facilities. So where's that power going to come from to power all these things? You've got to spend massive amounts on infrastructure to find, new ways, and you're not going to do it all with solar. That's not feasible. So you can ramp up the solar, and that's great for the silver market, but you've got to spend a ton of money on infrastructure, and again, that's just going to drive the needs for all of those, base metals and silver, and building up the infrastructure to support all this.
Yeah, and something I don't know that we've talked about before, but is that what drew you towards starting a silver company and going after the asset you've been doing? Is that what led you into that?
Part of it, I mean, silver is always versus, I mean, I've always been focused on precious metals. I like the ability to have both. I like having a project that has exposure to both of those, and if you get base metals, great, that's enough. But the main focus being precious metals. But silver, when you get into these bull markets, and silver, traditionally, even ignoring, what we could have this time with the industrial demand and what that could bring to the price, silver always outperforms gold on the way up, and outperforms it, quite shockingly. Just look at the ratio of what it goes. We can be at 100+ to 1 on the price, and all of a sudden it shrinks to 20 to 1 or less. It can, and that in itself, just the gold companies have done well in that same cycle, but the silver companies have outperformed them by 5 to 1. So having that exposure to silver when you do get into those crazy bull markets, is there's a lot of money to be made. And so, our project and the name of our company, I thought it was important to include silver in the name of the company and have exposure, but still have exposure to both gold and silver. And I mean, you can look at the silver producers, like a company like Pan American Silver, number two silver producer in the world, 70% of their production is gold.
Right.
So even when you're marketing to those silver companies, having a project that has that gold upside, because gold, in the down markets, those companies love to have exposure to gold, and then again, the base metals and bonus credits. So, I think targeting a project certainly that has, economic exposure to both is important.
Yeah, and in terms of a lot of the silver coming from lead, zinc, gold miners, what are you seeing there? Where my understanding is that for the most part, they have their silver, they just sell it at the market. But do you talk with any of those folks? What are you seeing in terms of how much silver you expect? I mean, if we have a slowdown or a recession, which certainly seems possible, that could impact that. Any thoughts on the silver supply that's coming from those byproduct miners?
Again, I mean, again, it would take, from talking with a lot of those guys, for the silver price would have to go up by just such an intense amount for it to become you know, meaningful for them to somehow try to expand just to target that, byproduct. So you're not expecting here, from those big, porphyry deposits where you get silver as a byproduct, this the band through Chile, Peru. It's just you're not going to ramp up production just to get to the silver unless we see some sort of, dramatic increase. And I mean that type of increase, I don't know what the number is, but say, $500,000 silver, something crazy for them to really say it warrants versus, just the amount of tons that those guys move through in those porphyry deposits. And you've got a good copper market still right now. It's pulled back a bit, but that's still at an attractive price for them. So and zinc and any of those. So I mean, those guys aren't going to ramp up production to make up for the supply difference. And again, I don't even know how much of a difference it really makes when they do ramp up. It's certainly a big part of our supply, but again, Mexico is the number one producer, and it's got a couple of those where it's a byproduct, but Mexico's, kind of your home for those primary silver deposits or ones that are, close to 50% or 60% silver. And is 30% of the world's production, give or take, depending on a given year what it's doing. And again, I think you're looking at the South American countries, if anything, with Chile nationalizing mines, Peru going very far left and potentially nationalizing mines, if nothing, when that happens, production in those countries tends to go down. It's not good for the world's supply. It's certainly not good for new projects coming online because they don't have that exploration expertise to bring on new projects. So across the spectrum there, I would expect with those types of move happening in those countries that you're going to see the supply of silver, copper, everything go down as we move forward year for year, with South America going the way it's going. And again, I think that just further, makes markets like Mexico, parts of the US, if you can get through the legislature, but certainly, areas like Nevada. But even Nevada doesn't have, massive new projects that are ready to come online. You've got some that have got very attractive grades and have done well share price wise, but it's not going to make a big dent on the supply here. You've got a couple in the Golden Triangle, but again, they're small. These are small numbers compared to what we're talking about with the demand going up. And then if you move away from the Western countries and go towards China and the East and Russia and what they can do, well, we're never going to see those ounces. The way this world's going, they're going to China's infrastructure boom, they're going to keep, they already are the number one gold producer in the world and the number one buyer of gold, and all of that gets into China, and you never see the light of day unless it's going to be used in trade between them and the other BRIC countries. But so where in the West are we going to get all this product?
And would you care to venture a guess of how long does it take before this imbalance really comes to a head? I know that's no one knows the exact answer to that question, but based on what you're seeing, is that 5 years out, 10 years out, or what would you say on that?
I mean, when it really comes to a head, I don't know. I think one of the big triggers or that people wake up to see that the stress is really there is when you start to see companies like Tesla, Apple, those guys. And I think I saw, they just backed one company actually, but I think they're going to start buying these mines and taking them private, and they'll hire guys to run them. And that's going to be how they're going to secure and make sure, as they realize that this shortage is here and they need to lock in their supply. And instead of relying on buying, the silver from, a smelter, or, they're going to start sourcing it directly themselves and control their own supply to make sure that they have it for all the products that they're producing. And so I just saw the group of billionaires started investing in another company that was, I can't remember the name of the company, but a bunch of those Bezos and those guys got together and funded, gave somebody like $1 billion plus or whatever to go and do exploration. But that's kind of the signs that those guys start doing that. I mean, and that's them doing it now, on Earth. We've seen those guys do that type of stuff with, the undersea mining. That's, still technology is a long ways away. Mining in space, you read those articles and those guys have found stuff like that. But that's them just kind of throwing their money around because it sounds cool, as opposed to something that's economic. When they start doing it, on Earth, on the ground, in the traditional methods, and finding guys to go. And I think the company I remember now I think it was in Greenland. They just financed the thing as the glaciers have been receding there, that they thought there'd be a huge source of base metals and nickel and that they could go get. But I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see those types of companies start to privately buy them, and that's going to be a trigger to the market that look, they're feeling the crunch of being able to actually acquire this product. But even those companies, I think, as smart as a lot of those guys running it are, they don't realize how long it takes to bring on that new supply. A lot of them, it's just instant gratification. What do you mean? Here's the money, start producing it, make it for me. And it doesn't work that way, and a lot of stuff taking longer, permitting wise, with the extra environmental pushes in the West. It takes that much longer to bring stuff online to actually get permitted to operate and build a mine, and then work through the kinks of the mine to make sure that it matches, your PEAs and your feasibility studies and what you say the mine was going to do. And so again, I think, like you say, when is that going to come to a head? I think it's going to come to a head, a lot sooner than later, and certainly I think within the next 5 years.
Yeah, will be interesting to see how that plays out. And Steve, perhaps before we wrap up, you could give folks an update on Silver Viper and how things are going there.
Yeah, I mean the projects. Right now we're taking a breather on drilling. We've been drilling since 2018, and we're looking around the rest of the project, really trying to lock down these other targets and understand the system and how all these different areas of the project come together and work. And actually just saw last week in one of our regional sampling reports, they think they found one of the feeders in the El Molino area on the project. They saw some pretty cool samples where they're seeing these volcanic glass with quartz veins running through it, and it's definitely a sign of a potential feeder. So that's a target, down El Molino. You can see it there on that image, that the southern end of it, that we think we may have found a feeder for that particular source of mineralization. Our main event, and our resource has been focused around the El Ruby area, and the geophysics that we completed. We're doing further work on that and working with that material, but that we're going to be following up and doing some deep drilling looking for the source of Ruby. And then the geophysics also showed us how the structure kind of shifted to the east as we moved north on it. So that is completely open to expand the open pit style resource that we came out with in our maiden resource on the project at El Ruby. So we're going to be very active drilling and working on the project. We want to time it as this market turns, but we're very active in this area. And I think, again, this is a very attractive asset. But you had to, in Mexico, when I said it's been picked over, so in this case you had to go to an area that traditionally had, the belt that we're in had very poor access. This particular spot was found by mine finders and was acquired by Pan American. They acquired the Dolores mine 100K to the south, but the whole company for 1.5 billion. And this was supposed to be the lookalike for Dolores. And at Ruby, we found a lot of similarities to Dolores. So again, fingers crossed that we're onto something like that asset, and we're going to grow this and grow it to be substantially bigger than it already is.
Well, Steve, I appreciate that. And seems like in terms of time wise, hopefully that will put you in a good spot with all the other supply and demand fundamentals out there. And of course, people can find out more information at silverviperminerals.com. Any questions, you can go to the contact tab. And fortunately, Steve was kind enough to stick around and record an update with a little more detail on what's going on in the project, which is coming your way now.